study session of October 20th, 2020 to order. Sutter County Board of Supervisors meetings will be open to the public with limited seating available. The state of California has issued a public health order mandating that face coverings be worn statewide in public gatherings as a result of the continued threat of COVID-19. For those unable to attend in person, please submit your comments via email by 12 p.m. on the day of the board meeting. Public comments can be emailed to the board clerk at co.sutter.ca.us and will be forwarded to the Board of Supervisors. Please identify the agenda item you wish to address in your comments. Members of the public will be allowed to address the board with respect to the items of the agenda only. The law requires that business not appearing on the agenda may not be discussed at a special meeting. If you wish to speak on any item appearing on the agenda, please fill out a speaker card. Noting the number on the agenda item, please fill out a separate card for each item. If you wish to speak under public comment, please note that on the speaker card. When the matter is announced, please approach the speaker's rostrum and wait to be recognized by the chairman. Testimony should always begin with the speaker giving his or her name. We will open this meeting with a roll call, please.
Supervisor Solinger?
Here.
Supervisor Flores?
Here.
Supervisor Ziegemeier?
Here.
Supervisor Whitaker? Supervisor Conant?
Yes.
Okay.
Can
Great.
you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you, Matt.
Okay, great. All right. Because I had trouble getting through it. It kept saying the meeting hasn't started yet. So thank you for dialing it in for me because it wouldn't go through my way.
Yeah. Okay, we will open this meeting. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the
one nation,
One.
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Members of the public will be allowed to address the board with respect to the items on the agenda only. The law requires that business not appearing on the agenda may not be discussed at a special meeting. We are now ready for appearance items. Item number 1, Mr. Hay.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Honorable Supervisors. Thanks for coming together for the study session this afternoon. This is the third study session that my department is presented. This one, as you're aware, is regarded to flood management and the county stormwater program. And while the basis of the program dates back to 2008, then there were some major changes made in 2016 when the county adopted essentially some flood maps. And I think that the Development Services, Public Works departments at the time kind of tried to relay the impacts and the potential impacts of those maps. But I think as we've lived with them now for quite a few years, I think they've created, some challenges, some frustrations, some benefits to the community and the citizens of Sutter County. And so what we're hoping to do with this study session is we have representatives from my department, David Tom and Nick Ramos and David Allison, who are certified floodplain managers and engineers in the department, as well as we have representatives Michael Bissett from SBFCA that are going to talk about specific aspects of our flood management. We actually have an ordinance section related to flood management, so we're going to talk about that and bring up some of the matters that maybe have become most challenging related to development and how it affects our department. And we will, essentially give an opportunity, obviously, for the questions that you may have and look for either direction or action items from you. For example, to be able to, look at amending the existing floodplain and flood management ordinance. We have some suggestions that we would offer to you, and we'll go from there. I'm happy to answer any questions before we begin, but otherwise I'll have David Tom, who's our Senior Civil Engineer for Water Resources, come forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, honorable board members. So we'll get right to the PowerPoint that we've prepared for you for the study session. First, introductions. Just letting you know that Neil Hay he wears a multitude of hats. So he's our Sutter County Floodplain Administrator. He's Gil Sizer County Drainage District Engineer, Sutter County Water Agency Engineer as well, which deals with the zones of benefit for the county. Then I'm a flood manager, and on the side I also do civil engineering and county surveying. certified floodplain managers, Nick Ramos and David Allison. They typically run the day-to-day dealing with building permits as they come in. And then we also have Michael Bissett and Chris Fritz from Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency here. So these are the topics for the day. Flood management, basically we'll tell you a little bit about the FEMA National Flood Insurance Program, community rating system that's run through FEMA as well, levee certification and FEMA physical map revision, and Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency new 100-year flood maps. The last two are basically the things that Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency has accomplished in the last few years and will accomplish in the next few years. We'll also be talking about stormwater management, the NPDES program, the Yuba City Basin Drainage Study, and Sutter County Drainage Standards Revision, which we hope to get to next year. First, the National Flood Insurance Program. What are the roles for each of these participants? So the federal role is the feds administer the National Flood Insurance Program. They advise the community and enforce community compliance. The state assists with the NFI community. They also train community, like staff, in how to impose the federal regulations, at least for the NFIP. So they will do training sessions for staff. They also assist with providing the template for the floodplain management ordinance for the county. So our role as the county is to make sure we enforce proper building requirements and inspect those buildings. We also retain all the records for building permits in the county, which we have to turn in for whenever the feds visit and the state visits our program. We share flood information with the county, with the public. Anyone in the county that has a question will answer how high they have to build, and in order to build per our county regulations and state regulations. We also are required to remedy non-compliance. So if the feds come in and tell us, hey, this building is built out of compliance based on one of their visits, we have to fix that or make the property owner fix the non-compliance issue. And we did that in 2008 when they came in. Several buildings were out of compliance. So why the NFIP program? It's a voluntary but required for federal funds. They make flood insurance available to local communities, and their desire is to diversify flood protection strategy. It's not just flood structures that they want to build higher and bigger, so dams. They realize that, hey, there's got to be a two-prong approach to floodplain management. It has to be, yes, we'll build dams and improve levees, but there also has to be good floodplain management associated with those as well, so that people don't build in special flood hazard areas. So they also, the federal government also has three prongs to their NFIP program. They do they map the flood risk. So those are in special or flood insurance rate maps, firms. And they also provide flood insurance. And then they have building regulations in the Code of Federal Regulations. So what are the elements? In the flood map risk element, there is FEMA flood insurance maps. And we adopted several new ones back in 2008 for our county that had major impacts on many of the basins. They give historical flood heights in those maps, and then they also help with state and local flood maps. Flood insurance that is available based on the flood insurance rate maps. They make flood insurance available to the NFIP communities that are participating in the program. Back in the 1920s, basically private insurance companies canceled, or they realized that, hey, flood insurance isn't profitable for us. there's way too many major catastrophes, and they would no longer provide flood insurance. So that's when the NFIP came into existence in 1968. So flood insurance is mandatory in floodplain for federally backed mortgages. That's a requirement if you're in a floodplain and you want to get a mortgage for a building loan. Building regulations, they prevent preventative measures instead of disaster relief, and they protect against 100-year flood or 1% chance of flood. When did the county join the NFIP? We joined in 1988. And at that point, we were required to adopt and enforce a floodplain management ordinance that meets or exceeds the NFIP criteria for a 100-year flood. FEMA acknowledged that we were part of the program, and they issued letters to us, hey, you're now part of the program, you have to enforce and adopt floodplain management ordinances that comply. NFIP is voluntary, however, it's required for federal funds. NFI communities are eligible for federal funds for individual property assistance, in other words, flood insurance, flood hazard mitigation, current grants that we have, and then permanent levee work, and then also major, like presidential disaster declarations where we become eligible for those in case of a flood. Just running through a few notable floodplain management ordinance requirements in our county that are sometimes often controversial. So new residential structures, the lowest floor has to be elevated 1 foot above the 100-year flood elevation, basically. New commercial industrial structures, the lowest floor has to be elevated 1 foot above the 100-year flood elevation as well. Wet flood-proof garages and agricultural structures, they're allowed to be built at grade with flood vents that automatically open, and the flood-resistant materials are required. So that's allowed through a variance program that the board has seen many times. Substantially improved structures must be elevated. So that requires us to do substantial improvement calculations where we determine, or where people provide us the current market value of the structure. We compare that to the improvements that they want to do. If it's less than 50%, we allow that. If it's more than 50%, then they have to elevate the structure if they want to continue on with their 50% or 51% or higher improvement. And then elevation certificates are required for all new and substantially improved buildings. So this is our local floodplain management ordinance. So we wanted you to see just where that comes from also in the Code of Federal Regulations, and then also the California Building Code, which you adopted in March of this year. So that's what this slide is for. So in our ordinance, we require 1 foot above the BFE. Code of Federal Regulations say it has to be a minimum up to the BFE or any local ordinance or state ordinance, okay? California Building Code, which is the CRC, is a California Residential Code. Section R322.2.1 says residential building has to be 1 foot above the base flood elevation. For commercial and industrial buildings, the lowest floor has to be 1 foot above the base flood elevation. That's in our ordinance. Code of Federal Regulations says a minimum of BFE or whatever's higher, your local ordinance or state ordinance, state code. California Building Code, section 1612.2 says it has to be built per the ASCE, that's an engineering brochure. 24, and that brochure, it's actually a handout. It's about 50 pages long that has all types of building requirements in special flood hazard areas. But that says that for a commercial industrial building, the minimum floor elevation has to be 1 foot above the base flood elevation. So our Sutter County ordinance requires it allows wet flood-proof garages and ag structures at grade with automatic vents. That's also stated in the Code of Federal Regulations, and California Residential Code and California Building Code sections also are shown there. Substantial improvements must be elevated. That's found in the Code of Federal Regulations, California Residential Code, California Building Code in those sections. And then elevation certificates are required. We now require 3 of them, one with the plans, one with the first form inspection, and one when it's all complete. In the Code of Federal Regulations, the number is not specified. In the California Building Code, the residential code says you have to have at least have an as-built. The California Building Code for commercial buildings says that 2 are required, 1 prior to going to vertical, so you have the slab poured. They want to make sure you have it at the right elevation before you go higher than that, and then the as-built is required after it's all done. Okay, so that just lets you know that, hey, this isn't just a Sutter County thing, it's a state, it's a federal requirements, that we're following these requirements, okay? So flood hazard area definitions. Basically, our code says, or ordinance says, it defines a floodplain as, or floodplain area means any land area susceptible to being inundated by water from any source. And then the areas to which this chapter applies is basically any special flood hazard area and local flood hazard areas within the county. And the California Building Code defines a flood hazard area as the greater of the following 2 areas, basically a 1% chance area of flooding, or an area in the community's flood hazard map or other legally designated area.
Through the chair.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a few questions before you?
How about if I get through this slide and then you can ask some questions? Because this kind of shows the different areas, and I know this slide will bring up questions. So this shows the Sutter County flood maps, okay? The maps depict 100-year flood, basically the areas where we require, that are 100-year flood areas. The FEMA firm shows these special flood hazard areas in solid. You can see basically the solid areas right there, basically a lot of the county. And then the local flood hazard areas are the hatched areas, basically a lot of the rest of the county, okay? And as this slide shows, the hatched areas were required by SB5 back in 2016, and Neil commented on that when he opened the presentation. So what happened in 2016? Okay, let's back up to 2008. In 2008, the county was mapped as a special flood hazard area. Let's just talk about the Yuba City Basin, this basin right here. Basically, the federal government came in and they redid our county floodplain maps, the firms. And the county got together with them as they were coming in and asked them to not map beyond like Stewart Road. Okay, they didn't want to have everybody in the Yuba City Basin mapped into a special flood hazard area with all the tumult that would have created. So they asked to stop those flood maps in 2008 to just below Stewart Road and south, okay? So at that point, we asked Peterson Brewstad to provide us with some flood maps, and they did. And they gave us base flood elevations, because we also didn't want everybody at that point with In an A zone, anybody could get their own engineer to come up with their base flood elevations for their house or for their subdivision. And the county didn't want to have everybody, doing that. So we hired Peterson Brustad, and they provided us with base flood elevations for the Sutter Basin, as well as for these areas over here. Okay, so all these blue areas, they basically provided us with base flood elevations for each of those areas, so that we could tell people how high they had to build. Okay. Well, the cutoff line at Stewart Road, basically on the north side of Stewart Road, it was an X zone area, and people could build at grade. South of Stewart Road, in some areas, they had to elevate buildings 15 feet as you get close to the Sutter bypass. Okay, that's not very equitable. Why would we tell people when we know the base flood elevation just south of them is 15 feet deep, and people to the north of them can build at grade? Okay, well, state legislation also knew that people, the counties or whatever, were doing those kind of things. Okay, possibly. So they had, in 2015, they required any jurisdiction had to impose regulations and changes to their general plan and zoning code, such that whenever a discretionary permit came into the county for review, we had to impose any known flood hazards for any area that was either in a special flood hazard area or a moderate risk flood hazard area. Okay? Moderate flood risk areas, basically, as they head north out of in the Yuba City Basin, they head right through the center going north towards the Wadsworth Canal at the 45-foot contour elevation, and they head north through the Sutter Triangle area as well at the 45-foot elevation and lower, okay? And all of Meridian Basin and all of basically Robbins Basin are moderate risk areas as well, okay? In the mix of all that, the state decertified all the levees and said, because they were sued by a paternal lawsuit that dates back before 2000, they had a lot of payout because of that lawsuit, because of the Linda levee breach. And so they said, hey, we're not sure, we want any jurisdiction to realize that all the levees in California they're not certified unless you certify them locally, okay? So Sutter County said, we don't want to certify the levees. We know a lot of them are built, possibly with sand lenses going through them. And so basically, in all of the moderate risk areas for Meridian, Robbins, Sutter Triangle, and then the areas of Yuba City that head through the middle here below 45-foot elevation, we had to impose flood hazards that we knew existed. So we could no longer, because of state law, say that below below Stewart Road, it was one elevation, and north of Stewart Road, it was a different base or no base flood elevation. We were required by state law to make a finding that they were protected to the 100-year flood elevation in each of these areas. So that's why in 2016, the floodplain administrator at the time adopted a base flood elevation map from PBI for the Robbins Basin, Meridian Basin, Sutter Triangle area, and the Yuba City Basin as well, so that we could impose Sutter County general plan requirements and zoning code regulations based on the new laws, SB 5, and there were six bills actually that were legislated in 2007-8 era that all had to come online in 2016 timeframe. So there's a lot of things that went into adopting those flood maps, as well as changing our general plan, changing our zoning code, so all of it was compliant with the state legislated requirements. So, sorry, that was a long explanation. Did you have something else that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I got a few questions here. We'll start out with, first of all, you talk about the 1 foot above. So are the roads, maybe this might, Neil, or you'd probably be able to answer this too. So are the roads considered is that flood level? Because you know what is it, the rules, you have finished floor 1 foot above the center of the road. So I'm assuming the roads are gonna be considered the flood, the level right there?
So in an X zone, we allow residential and commercial buildings to be built 1 foot above the nearest county roads.
Okay.
So that's not in a local or in a special flood hazard area.
So that's just, I guess I'm just, how you consider like the height and so forth. So you consider the road, that's your starting point right there in the community. A foot above that, that's finished floor.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I've had a lot of constituents ask me about, I got one constituent on Daphne Lane, bought a piece of property with a house that had burned down, and he could only rebuild it, looking up your slide there. 50% of the value, that's what he could spend in rebuilding this house. And I scratch my head and wonder, that just, it doesn't make any sense, because there was a house there previously. Why can't he just build the exact house? If it was there.
They specifically describe that scenario when a house is burned. So if it has burned more than 50%, then they're required to elevate above the base flood elevation. So,
but to me, once again, that for FEMA to impose, that's FEMA's imposing that, forcing that?
FEMA, as well as the state, I could go back and show that the state also requires that.
I mean, let's say a big fire burned through or whatever, like, God forbid, like Paradise or so forth, or Santa Rosa. I mean, you're telling me you'd have to come in and build a whole community up 15 feet tall? It just doesn't make any sense.
That's what would be required, yes.
So, and then we go back to historical. How far do those go? Like, let's say if we got a guy trying to build a house, Nevada, would you mind stepping up to this? All right, I got to, right up here if you don't mind. Do you mind if I ask you the address of that piece of property that?
The piece of property is located at Lincoln Road and where Humphrey intersection. My piece of property does not have an address yet, but it's 1284 Lincoln Road is what the property was adjacent to it. That's the address I have adjacent to it. I don't have an address yet.
And how many new houses have been built there in the last, let's say, 10 years?
In the last 10 years, within a half a mile, there's at least a half a dozen, maybe 9.
And when's the last time it flooded in that area?
I can't find in any history that it has flooded over Lincoln Road in that area ever.
And that's my question back to you, they talk about in the slides historical, dating back historical. So how far, when they set the standards, or maybe Mike, I'm trying to figure that out. How far do they go back for that data in saying that, hey, we're going to set these set of rules because historically it floods there every 100 years. Well, if it hasn't flooded there in 100 years, how can we impose those standards when
So as you're well aware, I'm sure the much of Sutter, Yuba City Basin flooded in 1955.
Right, correct.
Right, so it flooded well into Yuba City itself and well into the, up I think close to Franklin School.
Yeah, know it
Close to
very
there,
well.
okay.
So up by George Washington, there was about a foot deep
Okay.
right there. That's what my constituents tell me, that when in 1955, that when they flooded, it was like pretty close to a foot deep.
Well, I'm pretty sure since 1955, there's been a few houses that have been built on George Washington.
So
Yeah.
before we get it too much into flood depth and things like that, we do have another map so right now the levees have been pretty much completed. All the improvements have been completed. We're about ready to get them certified through the state. That will have changes to the Yuba City Basin that the department will bring some of those maps back to you when those levees are certified. And we can make some decisions at that point that it can bring some relief. It's not going to just say, okay, all the special flood hazard areas are gone, but they're brought back quite a ways. And we'll show that in a few slides.
All right, to me, it goes back to like, if a house burns down, why you can't just rebuild the house to where it originally was? If a shop, let's say if Amazon was over there and it burned down, I guarantee you they're gonna find a way to let them build the shop exactly where it was at. You know what I mean? So where there's a will, there's a way. So I'm trying to figure out, how does FEMA just come in here and say, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and we're gonna sit back and let them do it?
I think you have to understand that FEMA does not want the house rebuilt. The house is at risk, and the historical reference that they use for floodplain, it's not based on whether an area will flood. It's that, and through an engineering analysis that FEMA dictates, that these engineering professionals, they have to follow a certain protocol, and I realize it's frustrating to, multiple members of our community and our supervisors, but FEMA set out some guidelines. It's actually all was a result of Katrina. So that's what initiated all of the studies of the levees, is the levees around New Orleans failed and the city flooded, and unfortunately people lost and billions of dollars were damaged. It was subsequent to that, within a couple years, is when FEMA came out with all the regulations.
Well, I know that, Neil, but the biggest thing is I've reached out to Assemblyman Gallagher, Congressman Garamendi, Congressman Lamalfa, only to be told that good luck getting a word out of FEMA. So FEMA wants to come out here and impose, and we're going to force you this, but
Right,
are they receptive?
No, they're not receptive to substitutions or changes or deviations. And what may get into part of our presentation is that our department issues building permits subject to these FEMA conditions in the county's floodplain ordinance. FEMA then comes out within every 3 to 5 years and goes through the building permit file of every project that we permit. And they then go out to the sites and they inspect the properties, and projects that have been issued agricultural variances through our ordinance. If there have been modifications made, they previously have ordered the county to have those homeowners, agricultural owners, property owners, redo the changes because they no longer comply. And it's kind of like, David mentioned in the slide, so having a flood program is a requirement to have a flood insurance program. And it also is a very pivotal factor is how the county was eligible for levee improvement funding. If we do not participate in the NFIP, and if we are not good stewards of the FEMA's guidelines, then the other arms of the federal government will not give SBFCA money to repair our levees.
No, I agree with you there. And for districts like mine, who are the black sheep of the levee family, there's not enough homes out there, so we're not going to worry about your levees. We're going to concentrate on these levees over here. I mean, look at Natomas. Look, that never stopped anyone over there. Look at Garden Highway. And what I'm getting at, they're still going. Well, I think that Sacramento County say, you know what, we're not going to listen to you, FEMA. We're going to get going, and we dare you to pick a fight with us.
Well, actually, so Sacramento and Natomas did. So they had to get, and they were given an X99 or an A99 designation. and they had to stop for a period of time while the FEMA and the federal government gave them hundreds of millions of dollars to improve the levees along the Sacramento River. And they currently have a project that they are going to improve the levees along Pleasant Grove Canal, which is along the eastern side of the Natomas Canal from Riego Road to Housley Road. And that's in Sutter County, and they're going to improve and construct a whole new levee along what is Natomas Road for the county. But once again, it requires the agencies to be active participants, in their program to be eligible. I think part of the, the challenge is that we had the initial FEMA ordinances that came through and we were kind of working through them, but then when the state passed SB 5, as David mentioned, they essentially went and decertified the Sutter bypass. That's why there's all the extra blue on the map. The state did that. So the state unfortunately had to do that because of the FEMA's guidelines, because they didn't want to be liable to pay everybody's insurance claims if they got flooded out.
Well, how did you get them to stop at Stewart Road? I mean, why couldn't you get them to stop any further? It's like, whoa, why Stewart?
Because of the population center. So Yuba City and the population center.
That's what I'm getting at. We couldn't have stopped them any further, or that was it?
That was it.
All right. Thank you. I really appreciate it, guys. And then I guess I'll wait for you, Michael Bissett, when you get up there, because I'm going to pick your brain on those new flood maps, and so you could, because I know a lot of people, well, the few here in the audience are going to want to know where that's going to take the bar, hopefully lower the bar quite a bit.
Through the chair, so from my estimation, being on this board for 18 years, it always seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bissett, it seems like we're always chasing a moving target. We always hit a standard with our levies, and we try to certify those levies based on the standard, and then FEMA comes in and says, here's a new standard now, and this is what you have to reach. They did it when we did the Shanghai Bend. They didn't certify their own work. FEMA didn't even certify their own project and their own work. And then they said, wait, here's a new criteria now, and this is the new level that you have to hit if you want to hit this. And this is what I'm afraid of, is that we've spent a lot of money doing our benefit assessment and assessing our Sutter County citizens, is that now when we get these levies certified, is FEMA going to come back in 5 years and say, okay, wait, now here's a new level you have to hit and maintain to get those levies certified?
We want you to guarantee that for us, okay?
It's going to happen. I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, it's based on past history.
Yeah.
And through the chair, I want to say one thing. And this year, guys, with COVID, through the crowd, this was going to be, this is what these guys, everyone goes back to Washington, D.C. for, which those meetings were canceled. And that's our one time of the year to actually get in front of those people. So that wasn't able to happen 6 months ago. So let's cross our fingers and hopefully that happens in 2021.
To the chair.
Sir.
If I may, and I don't recall which supervisors were with me in 2019, but when we had our meeting with FEMA, it was about the coldest and most one-sided meeting of any agency. I'll just tell you that off the get-go. And maybe it was just those few staff, and I'd like to think that they would be open to further discussion on these, but it was, yeah, pretty, I'd say tense meeting, which most of them back there are not.
So at the bottom of the screen, you can see that there's a lot of floodplain in Sutter County, percentage-wise. Probably 75% of our county is in floodplain. So I don't like that. I know that no one likes being in a floodplain because of all the special restrictions. But it's here to stay for a while, I believe. Oops.
Through the chair.
Yes.
My concern is some of the flood maps are not, I don't think, correct. There's a lot of errors made that FEMA, engineers involved. I just don't see that, when you start, for example, where my house is here, the levee to the south of us is 3 feet above the ground level, but yet the flood plain is 7 feet above ground level. well, what imaginary levee is going to hold that water back? Or are we going to flood all the way to Sacramento, which it would, because we're at 75 feet, and then you know, I mean, I just think there's a lot of that going on with it. It's totally flawed. And I also think that it's jeopardizing our agricultural production, that we can't do the improvements to our infrastructure that we need to have to maintain our farming operations, let alone farmhouses. I think that you need to have some farmhouses, and I realize there's risks with that, but building in a floodplain. But you know, if a house has been there 100 years and never been flooded, well, maybe that's long enough.
Yeah. So in regard to areas that are remapped, the community has a 6-month window where they can make comments on any new flood insurance rate map. So that's the time, and that'll be happening for like the Yuba City Basin here, probably in 2 or 3 years, when the new flood rate map is, at least the preliminary map is issued to the county. We can make any comments saying, well, we think it should be, you haven't analyzed the elevation of this area very well. And we can make comments like that. But after they're all done, the other aspect is if you think there's a discrepancy, individual landowners can also always do a letter of map amendment if they think it has been mapped incorrectly. So that is always open to the general public to do. I'm going to go on at this point. And we're going to have Nick come up and talk about the CRS program.
To interrupt the meeting for just a second, apparently Yuba City Council has this portion of their facility scheduled. We have been ordered to be out of here by 4:30, so keep an eye on questions and or statements that we make or discussions. 4:30, they want us out of here, so.
Yuba City doesn't, sorry, through the chair, Yuba City doesn't have to worry about a flood issue, though. So, I'll make her wait.
In 55, they did, Mike.
So I'll try to make quick work of the CRS program. It's what CRS stands for. It's FEMA's community rating system. It builds upon the National Flood Insurance Program. There is a federal role. FEMA, again, they administer CRS. They advise the community, and they also calculate CRS activity points. It's basically an flood insurance discount program. For the community role, Sutter County documents the CRS activities, meets the CRS prerequisites, and submits annual reports, as well as a 5-year recertification report. Our most recent annual report was accepted with no issues. The benefactor of this program are flood insurance policyholders. So they receive a flood insurance discount for our participation in this and maintaining a class based on points. The only person that's not the benefactor of that is a preferred rate policy, which is, I think, in the ballpark of around $400 a year, relative to what could be about $4,000 a year. The purpose of CRS, it's entirely voluntary, but it builds upon the NFIP. So if you're a National Flood Insurance Program participant, you can also participate in CRS. It further, the intent is to further reduce flood damage, offers an insurance discount for exceeding the NFIP minimum standards. The elements that make up CRS are public information, mapping and regulation, flood damage reduction, and flood preparedness. So it even builds into OES functions. There are 18 credible activities. I didn't want to list them all. I just wanted to list what we participate in. And these are the points that we gained in our previous recertification process. So we maintained this over the last year and maintained its Class 6 rating. Built in there with elevation certificates specifically, there's not a lot of points, but it is one of the prerequisites that we have to meet, and there is a lot of effort put into it. Sutter County joined the CRS program in 2008. We are currently a Class 6 community. What that offers is a 20 to 10% insurance discount. There's currently $1.3 billion in flood insurance that are in force. What comprises that is about 4,000 policies. And collectively, because of our Class 6 rating, they receive or collectively save around $200,000. And this was updated this August. Kind of describing CRS communities further, 1,500 of which are of the 22,000 NFIP communities participate in CRS, but all the flood policies tend to be in CRS communities, 70% of them. So if you participate in CRS, it's likely you have a high number of insurance policies, and we do. We have the 5th most in California. What kind of also comprises that, we also have 7,800 parcels that are also in the floodplain. So there's a big majority. These are those top 50 communities by insurance. Here's where we live. We've been, I think, ranked 5 for some time now. We're definitely not Sacramento with 44,000 essentially, but we do have 4,000 policyholders. And we rank, and if you were to compare us to other communities, a good metric is using the class rating. We are a 6, which is relatively high. If you see a dash, they're essentially a 10. They either do not participate or haven't garnered any points. Trying to show you perspective relative to the communities that surround us. This is where we are, Sutter County, we're a Class 6. Yuba City, Yuba County are also a 6, and Yolo County is an 8. This is how the points break down. It doesn't really give a good metric on kind of the time that it takes to do that, and this is where we are based on those 21,000 points, or 2,100 points, sorry. This is a breakdown, and this one's pretty interesting. This takes those policies that we currently have as of August and gives us a savings based on a class rating. So for a Class 6, collectively as a community, we're saving about $200,000 a year for those policyholders. But if you can go up and down in the scale, 1 being the highest, 10 being a no insurance discount, you can see kind of how that breaks out. And on the far right, the preferred rate policies, they don't get an insurance discount. The benefits to participating in CRS are enhanced public safety. Policyholders save on their premiums, that's the big one. And grant priority. This one's not discussed as often, but it is something that FEMA is looking at. And kind of building on what the CAO had mentioned about FEMA being maybe tight with money or having trouble with money. Being in their good graces and being in the top priority is definitely a benefit, especially when it comes to hazard mitigation grant plans and permanent work, like the LEVEE stuff. It really puts us at the top of the list when we're requesting those funds by participating in CRS. There are challenges associated with being in the program. There is an effort. Every year, it seems to be more cumbersome to maintain the same points. It's around 800 a year. There's more effort in some years, but this is an estimation of the time associated with conducting the CRS program. A lot of the activities that we do for CRS are not eligible for grant funding, unfortunately. The next steps that I could discuss here is the firm maps have not been updated for some time, but there have been annexations that have happened since. The policies are issued to the community based on firm maps. So we hold about 2,000 policies that would otherwise be associated with Yuba City. Those, based on the updates to the firm maps, those will then get transferred. I think the majority of which are preferred rate policies, but we do carry their responsibility at this time. But we are luckily the same class rating as Yuba City. The timeline that we'll hold those policies is about 3 to 5 years from today. And then there's the alternatives to consider in participating in CRS. What would we do in the future? Would we consider improving our program, maintaining our rating, reducing our rating, or discontinuing the program altogether? There are kind of some time-intensive prerequisites in order to participate, just to be a Class 9 that you have to conduct. So the effort between a 6 and a 9 are actually relatively similar. Are there any questions concerning CRS? All right. I'll transfer it back to Dave for the levy certification and FEMA physical map revision.
Okay, now for the good news.
Excuse me, I did have one question. Just how many parcels are there in all of Sutter County? Because you mentioned the number that, I'm just curious. If you don't know, we can find out.
I'm not sure. Okay, so levy certification. And this is what Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency is accomplishing. The next steps for, I'm sorry. Wait. Am I going the wrong way? I'm sorry. Gotta get my clicker right. Okay, so their Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency is going to certify the west levee of the Feather River for 200-year certification. They're preparing those that documentation for submittal to the state Central Valley Flood Protection Board in March of next year. So that's coming up very soon. And that's saying that the levees are certified to protect the communities of Yuba City and I believe Live Oak as well to 200-year flood protection. The Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency design team will certify those levees as providing flood protection per the Department of Water Resource urban levee design criteria. And then the cities and counties will use that substantial evidence in the record to comply with the state's urban level of flood protection criteria, or SB5. Periodic reviews will occur by a civil engineer every 5 years to maintain the 200-year urban level of design certification. So that's all in regard to large cities in the area. They are required by SB5 to show that they are basically not allowing building below the 200-year flood elevation in areas in their community. Along with that, Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency is preparing a physical map revision request for submittal to FEMA in October of 2021. So not only there are state requirements for development, now this is for the federal government to get Sutter County remapped. Okay, the process for the physical map revision with FEMA typically takes between 2 and 4 years. Part of that is FEMA reviews the physical map revision request and prepares draft flood insurance rate maps. That process takes about 18 months. FEMA issues the draft maps for the community to review, and there's a formal appeal period in that. So that's what I was talking about before. That's your chance to investigate, see if everything makes sense on the ground. FEMA finalizes the process of the firms and the flood insurance report materials and issues a letter of final determination, and that's usually another 12 months. So you're looking close to the end of 2025 when the community actually will have to adopt the maps that are issued. And then the maps become effective 6 months after the letter of final determination. More good news. So Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency has, through PBI, when the levees are complete, they've given us some draft maps. Take a look at how they are viewing the improvements to our floodplain. And you can see at the bottom of area, the base flood elevation would be 48 feet, and then going up towards the Wadsworth Canal of 50, and then actually in the very high corner of, I'm just going to go back. The high corner of the Wadsworth Canal, it gets up to 57. So this is the base flood elevation of Yuba City, the maps through the years. Back in 2008, Sutter the Yuba City Basin, PBI, basically mapped to what I said is the Stewart Road, just south of Stewart Road, and the base flood elevation for those maps was 51.5. Because of Senate Bill 5, we used best available information, and so we started using this map from PBI. That was through Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency as well, and it used 51.5 at the south end of the basin, and then it actually used a breach in the levee close to the Wadsworth Canal there as the highest point and being the worst case scenario. So that impacted the center of the Yuba City area right in here because of that levee breach analysis. So again, those maps were adopted because of the Senate Bill 5. They weren't adopted, they were actually just used as best available information. I'm sorry. So this current map shows the difference between the map from 2016 and basically after the levees have been improved. It drops the flood elevation about 4.5 feet in the Yuba City sphere of influence, which is very significant. This is kind of a close-up of the area near the sphere of influence. It shows the area south of Stewart will still be in a special flood hazard area. The area north will be local flood hazard area. So as a county, we'll need to determine, okay, how are we going to use this map? Because in the special flood hazard area, people will still need to comply with any base flood elevation that FEMA determines is the right base flood elevation.
Through the chair, is when you say like the special, is that the local flood zone? Is that what that's considered?
So special flood hazard area is anything that FEMA says is like an A zone. So that's anything south of Stewart Road on this map. So the red line, see the red line in the middle?
Well, let's look up where Lincoln Road, is it? Lincoln and Humphrey. What changed between this map in 2016? Lincoln,
Yeah.
Lincoln and Humphrey.
So it would have changed probably 4.5 feet. So if it's north of that line. So we can talk about it afterwards, okay? So we're not going to, we have a lot of slides to get through yet, but I'd be happy to look at it with you afterwards. And we have a recommendation of when we would actually adopt this as well here coming up. We're not definitively saying, let me just get into it a little bit farther here. So the base flood elevation in south of that line, the red line, is 48.0 feet above sea level. It's possible that in that special flood hazard area, building and insurance requirements that we would require could be to build a minimum of 1 foot above 48 or 49 or the nearest county road. That's one way of applying this map, okay, even in the special flood hazard area there. Or we could just keep the requirement of elevating above the 51.5 below that red line and make a different elevation north of 48.5. Depends on, we'll bring a recommendation back to the board when it gets close to certification of the levees. In the special flood hazard area, flood insurance will be required all the time until the maps are revised, as well as base flood finished elevation certificates will also be required in that area. So everything will have to be documented because it's a special flood hazard area in that with base flood elevation, and will be scrutinized by FEMA until the maps are revised. So the next steps are basically to wait for the West Feather River levee certification in March of 2021. Development Services will schedule, to be on the board, an agenda item on the board with our recommendation for how to apply those maps to the county as that time nears. And I'm sure there'll be discussion between the board and county council as well as our department to know how to best apply those maps and adopt them. So at this point, if there's any questions that you want to direct towards Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, it would be a good time regarding the maps or timing, or if you have a comment to make.
Well, through the chair, Mike, you and I had this conversation about a month ago. We were talking about the maps and how we, as the supervisors, would be able to work with these new maps, even though they're not set in policy, since the maps have already been done. 3 to 5 years, this whole board might be gone in 3 to 5 years. We're trying to get stuff done here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your concerns and trying to figure out all this information. And, we're working very closely with your staff. And I think the presentation is very good today. It outlines the process that we're going through. Your staff is currently administering the floodplain in the most prudent manner using best available information that, our team provided back 4 years ago now. But there's been a lot of levee work accomplished since that time, and we're very, very close to certifying the Feather River West Levee project at 200-year, and that's for the urban areas. And then we'll be quickly following up on the FEMA remapping in the Yuba City Basin for FEMA. After that, we're waiting for the Army Corps to finish their levee work, which goes all the way down to the Highway 99 bridge, and that'll be completed at the end of this year. So that's why we're going to wait to initiate the FEMA remapping. Once all of that levee work is completed, we receive all the as-built drawings from the Army Corps, and we're able to do our work and start doing the FEMA remapping process. But at that time, we'll have the best available information, as David said, basically in March of next year. So that's when this board can take an action, decide how they want to administer the floodplain, or have your floodplain manager do that based on best available information. And I think, as David showed, there's like a 4-foot beneficial floodplain BFE lowering using those new maps.
And that was all they could squeeze out of there. That's us going to bat saying, man, we can't squeeze out another foot and a half. That was it.
Yeah, that's as good as it gets, but it's a very beneficial map compared to what you're using right now.
Oh, no, I agree. 4 feet makes a difference, but it makes a huge difference. But every inch makes a difference, you know what I mean? And all right, I applaud you guys. Good work. Thank you, Mike. Mike's always there whenever we get questions. And staff, thank you guys. I still scratch my head over the whole, if a house burned down and they got to replace the house, that makes zero sense to me. Why you can't rebuild a house, the same structure that was there for 150 years or 100 years.
Yeah, I'd like to touch upon that. So basically, FEMA is saying we don't want to make the same mistakes of the past. So if somebody built a house in a floodplain, it's still susceptible to flooding, and they don't want to see a house rebuilt when you know that they're in a special flood hazard area. So that's why they're administering. They want the locals to administer their rules to prevent that from happening. That's exactly why. I know it doesn't seem to make sense, but That's the reason why.
I'm just curious how much of that airport's in a flood area? You know, yeah.
Through the chair. I'd just like to say that I think you guys have done a great job doing levee repairs and made great headway in the last 5-6 years. Huge levee improvements. I am still concerned about the touch on that.
We're losing you, Matt. We can't hear you any longer.
I asked if you could a little bit bypass the improvements that need to be done there.
Okay, you're back.
We missed the central part of what you were saying, though.
Something about the bypass?
I said, first of all, a great job doing the levee repairs in the last 4 or 5 years, 6 years. Tremendous amount of levee improvements been done. However, I'd like to have him talk a little bit about what still needs to be done on the bypass.
Thank you, Matt. I did hear the question. So it's for the Sutter bypass. So we're looking at, the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency is looking to do improvements along the Sutter bypass East Levee. We need a funding source. So we're working very closely with the state of California. We're looking for available grants that they may have out there. We did receive some funding to do feasibility studies. We've completed that work. We're still in the process of doing some additional study work to better position ourselves for future grant opportunities. But right now, that's what we're looking for, either state or federal grants to help us move forward and do critical repairs along the Sutter bypass. It's going to take over $250 million to do all of the levee improvement work along the Sutter bypass East Levee to get the Yuba City Basin out of that special flood hazard area. So, I mean, that's going to be a long time coming, but we're trying to initiate critical levee repairs to greatly reduce flood risk to the area. So I hope that answers your question, Matt.
Yeah, through the chair, just one last comment, Mike. That is a state levy, correct?
Yes, it is. And, you know, it's on the state's list of potential improvements in the future, but, you know, they only have so much money and they have a long list of priorities. And unfortunately, that levy is lower on their list. But we're doing everything we can to increase their interest in doing improvements. They have a local agency, Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, who's willing to partner with them, not only with local match money, but also with the skills and the teams to move those projects forward, so to take on and manage that process. So we're hoping we can leverage that and move some improvements forward.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, continuing on. Nick is going to come back up and talk about our MS4 program.
So MS4 is actually based in the Federal Clean Water Act. It stems from a program that they developed called the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES. California has actually been granted the authority by the federal government to administer that program. So now it's a state water program. And within their sliver of the NPDES, they have a stormwater program that they break into 4 components: industrial, construction, Caltrans, and municipalities. We live under municipalities for the MS4 Phase 2 program. It's known as the Multiple Separate Storm Sewer System. Phase 1 was based on larger cities above 100,000. Phase 2 was based on communities less than 100,000. Where they focus their efforts is urban communities, and where that applies to us is areas adjacent to Yuba City. There's quite a mouthful of permit elements, quite a lot to do. I just wanted to list them here. The big component being water quality, but there are several reporting and regular monitoring programs that are elements of the MS4 Phase 2 program. In large, the green areas that you see here represent our area where the program is to be enforced. When we need to monitor the waterways of the entire community, even though the urban area is limited to that sliver that you see adjacent to Yuba City. This is a close-up of that map, and these are the green areas that we're discussing. The permit history associated with the MS4 program is at one point, Sutter County and Yuba City were co-permittees. That was later changed by the state, and Sutter County, Yuba City, and Live Oak were asked to be individual permittees. In 2013, we requested a waiver that was denied soon thereafter. It was not denied on any of the bases based on the waiver, but the potential to still impact water quality. We had recently submitted a waiver to be exempt from this program and anticipate a response in about January of this next year. What the MS4 program brings, in the meantime, having submitted the waiver, we're still being asked by the state to continue with the program. What that means to the public are additional building requirements, permit costs associated with those building requirements, and what that means for staff are permit reviews and inspections, staff training, program development implementation, ordinance updates, consultant contracts, public education and outreach, online reporting through the SMARTS program. The program was intended to be implemented from June 2013 to June 2018, so we're currently out of compliance. We haven't fully vetted an MS4 Phase 2 program, which is essentially a stormwater program to meet the state's requirements. We have been in contact with the state. They have issued a letter, and we have responded asking for an altered date of compliance. So the plan we propose is from 2020 to 2025. At that same time, we also submitted a waiver. Establishing the program cost is, it's rather costly. Over the course of 5 years, we'll probably spend $750,000 to $1 million to establish the program. There are ongoing future costs associated with implementing the program, staff time, monitoring and testing, consultant costs, operation and maintenance of systems that we install, and new permit amendments and requirements. So the state has recently issued a trash amendment and a pyrethroids program, pyrethroids being a pesticide that they want to see gone, and currently issued us a letter because we are out of compliance with the pyrethroid order. We submitted a petition, but that was denied, and they've issued 2 alternatives to move forward. One of those being a monitoring plan, and the other one being where we characterize our urban stormwater. But if the characterization exceeds their minimum requirements for the levels that they have set, we'll still be required to implement a plan, a management plan specifically. And so the timeline for this would be, we have to submit the plan by February of next year and submit all our monitoring by June of the following year. The second alternative that we could choose is a management plan. We could basically assume that the order appropriately characterizes our stormwater and submit a report by August of next year. Right now we have the Yuba City Basin Drainage Study, which I'll actually return to Dave, but before I go, are there any questions with respect to the MS4 program? It is a stormwater program. Thank you.
Okay, over the next year or so, the department would also like to basically make headway in both the Live Oak Canal and Gill-Sizer Slough drainage sheds. And so just a little discussion about drainage for the city of Yuba City and the surrounding sphere of influence. There are 2 main drainage sheds, Live Oak Canal and Gill-Sizer Slough. They both are operated by the county at this point, and the engineer would be Neil for those. Live Oak Canal is governed by the Sutter County Water Agency. It's funded by the zones of benefit. Currently, there are 5 zones that are governed by ordinances that have been adopted by the Sutter County Water Agency. Operation and maintenance is collected on tax bills that are sent out yearly, and the amount for operation and maintenance of the Live Oak Canal comes to about $180,000 a year that's collected. Capital fees for the Live Oak, for improvements on the Live Oak Canal are connected prior to building permit issuance. Current capital collected is approximately $1.9 million, and that's basically dedicated to improving the Live Oak Canal. For Gil-Sizer Slough, the Gil-Sizer County Drainage District is the governing board for that. The district is funded by O&M collected on tax bills as assessments as well, and about $440,000 is collected annually for maintenance of the drainage slough. The capital fee is collected prior to building permit issuance. It's collected on a per square foot of impervious area that's added to the surface of whatever's being developed. Current collected capital is approximately $3.7 million, and that amount is unassigned to anything at this point. Improvements on the slough probably, but at this point it's unassigned. Existing fees, this is from 2017. This was pulled from a WestGeo study that was done for us in 2018. So these fees are typical of the drainage zones of benefit, as well as Gil-Sizer. So Gil-Sizer is shown for the commercial per square foot. Basically, this is per acre. If you multiply the per square foot out by acreage, it comes to $8,000 per acre. Some of the other zones, there's for commercial and multifamily, you have in zone 4, it's between $7,000 and $11,000 per acre. And it's pretty typical for all the zones. The most expensive zone to develop in would be zone 8 at $22,000 per acre. And again, these fees are dedicated to improving the Live Oak Canal, to make it deeper, wider, improve the crossings under roads and those kinds of things. So in February 2018, WestGeost, actually 2017-18, in that time frame, WestGeost was hired to complete a study for us for the drainage sheds, both Gil-Sizer and Live Oak Canal, to determine what improvements need to be made so that we can develop out the city in both areas within the sphere of influence. And they came up with capital improvements needed for 22 detention basins, and to the tune of $92.7 million. Cost of O&M for those basins came out to $119,000 per year. Cost per acres, this chart, I'm sorry, is so small, but the typical cost per acre is on the top here. You can see different, you can't see them very well, but it goes from residential, commercial, multifamily. There's all kinds of different types of development. And then it's broken down by either the Live Oak Canal or Gil-Sizer, or combined as one in the bottom. So there's different alternatives on how to collect money to pay for the $92 million worth of improvements that would be required. Fees range from $42,000 per acre for commercial to, I think, probably about $20,000 for residential areas. So that's what their study came up with. proposed next steps for going on so that people can develop within the community having drainage capacity for, for their development. Basically, all past development has basically assumed that the slough or the Live Oak Canal would be deepened and widened. The assumptions that actually what the study determined from West Yost is that it's actually less expensive to have detention ponds be built by developers instead of deepening and widening the canal, so that you have drainage mitigated closer to the site, as well as not impacting the canals as much as well. So in the future, we would like to simplify the table, as well as decide how to divide responsibilities for capital improvements and O&M for the detention basins. What parts of this are Yuba City responsible for building and maintaining? What aspects are the county water agency going to be responsible? Typically, it's for the canal itself. Yuba City would be responsible for building out the detention ponds. And then the same would probably be true for Gil-Sizer County Drainage District as well. The district itself will be responsible for the canals, and the community or the developer would be responsible for installing the detention basins.
Through the chair, quick question on that slide. You answered part of the question right there. Are you able to get a percentage to see how much of that affects Yuba City? Because once again, Gil-Sizer, and then Live Oak Canal. If we're handling all that, how much is, if Yuba City is
part of that needs to be worked out, is deciding exactly where the demarcation is going to be for what's collected, what capital improvements are installed. They also have specific plans that they've adopted in some areas that need to be dovetailed in with the zones of benefit as well. It's somewhat of a complex topic, because along with that, we also have agreements, like with Yuba City Unified School District. They installed some capital improvements for a large pipe that drains from basically behind River Valley all the way over to the Live Oak Canal. And so we owe them about $1 million as people develop in that area. So we can't just get rid of the capital improvement program and the funding stream. We can try to augment what we have and not just totally replace all of it. The other thing is we can't just get rid of the zones of benefit, the assessments, because then it's hard to impose new 218 votes to adopt new assessments. Basically, you can only do that as people develop in undeveloped areas and require them to join at that point. So that's our next steps, is basically adopt a capital improvement program. Okay, what part is Yuba City going to install? What part is the slough going to Gil-Sizer? What part is the water agency through the Live Oak? And have a clear demarcations of all that, as well as the O&M fees to go with that. In the interim, we want to truth the West Yost study that was done. Some of us have the opinion that it was a little bit, they overestimated what actually reaches the canal right now. They assume that there's lots of flooding on the canal. So we're having 4 water level monitoring gauges installed hopefully before the end of this year. 2 on the Live Oak Canal and 2 on Gil-Sizer Slough, so that we can measure and see if what actually hits in like a 10-year, hopefully we have a large storm that comes through, not that anyone floods, but that we see some drainage coming down the canal, and that we have some rain gauges in the community as well, so we can correlate those two and see if what's coming down through the canal is actually matches what we see in the study. So it's kind of truthing our models. And Neil. Yeah.
So we're getting close to the end, and certainly we appreciate your time this afternoon. I realize that both floodplain issues and stormwater issues may not be the most exciting, but they certainly impact, I'll say, the citizens that come to our office and our department and are seeking to build a permit. It would seem so easy to be able to give a building permit for a house or an ag building when it's dry weather and everything, and they're just in a certain part of the county. But hopefully this session has given you some insight as to how complicated it can be. And some of the both state and federal regulations that we're mandated to follow and, unfortunately enforce. But we appreciate, your time this afternoon. If there's any questions or action items you'd like us to take away, we're happy to do that, or, certainly we can have a follow-up discussion.
No, through the chair, I would personally like to have possibly maybe sometime this week or next week. I'd love to get a couple of you, not just, I know Nevada Smith is here, but there's a couple others. Be nice to have a meeting, possibly maybe after the Public Works meeting,
Okay.
either this Thursday or we could have it possibly in the we'll check the calendar and make sure so we don't take up any more time here because I think just those I think 2 or 3 good questions spread out throughout those flood areas there that will be able to answer a lot of questions for me personally. Thank you.
Glad to.
Steve, do you have anything else to add?
No, Mr. Chair, I do not.
Okay. Neil, thank you so much. It's rather boring, but as you say, it's germane to the problems that we have, and I appreciate, the work that you guys have to go through in order to understand the contradictions that appear, I'm sure, at times, and I'm sure you scratch your head and say, how in the hell could they figure that one out? But in any event, we appreciate it. Unfortunately, folks, we're supposed to be out here by 4:30. Again, thank you for being here, and unless there's something else, this meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.